Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, and I'm over here by the hanging rock section of the layout, back in the aisle, and one of the scenic highlights planned for this area has always been Horse Thief Canyon. It's a serpentine slot canyon that cuts back into the plateau here, and I just finished with this particular bit of scenery, and I'd like you to come along with me and watch how it all went together. So Horse Thief Canyon represents a slot canyon, and if you're not familiar with slot canyons, it's kind of a narrow, serpentine, tall, skinny canyon that you find here in the Southwest, particularly up in the canyon and mesa country north of Grand Canyon, up in Canyonlands and up in the Lake Powell area and places like that. Cut through sandstone and limestone, soft sedimentary rock. They're very deep. Usually, but not very wide. In some cases, you can stand in a slot canyon and reach out and touch both sides. And by the way, not a good place to get caught in a flash flood. And I wanted to model one here in the layout because I'd never seen one modeled before, so thought I'd give it a try. And I got about this far and stopped for whatever reason. But my process for doing it, I think, was pretty good, and I'm going to continue with that process. It's built in sections, and the reason I had to build it in sections is because, well, once it's, cemented, glued into place, you can't really access this back area. I can't get my hands in there to paint that. So I have to completely sculpt and paint and finish each of these sections as I go, and then glue them into place. So the bottom third here is pretty much done. This next section is already carved, but it needs to be finished. And then there's all of this area up here that has to be carved out of foam and painted and finished also. And when I get this finished, hopefully this week, that will fill in the very last remaining big hole in the layout where you can still see the bench work and the wiring and things like that, the backstage stuff. So I think the first thing to do is to take off this unfinished section and use it to mark the cuts for the next section, and then go ahead and finish this, paint it, and install it. Now I've got a little work table set up here near the layout, and I've already cut some blanks out of some 2-inch XPF. That's that pink polystyrene foam. And I'll show you how I do this. This is the top. Just lay this one right on top of that, match it up. Then I take a bamboo skewer and go in and just kind of etch the outline into this layer of foam. I use the bamboo skewer because it's long enough to reach down in there and gives me a nice positive line that I can see in the foam. Now you can't, it's kind of hard to see. There's some old lines on here. I'm using some recycled XPF from an earlier project, but now I'll take my hot wire cutter and cut this shape out. And I'm purposefully cutting inside the line here. Give myself a little wiggle room. I can go back and trim things up. There we go. I want the canyon to kind of open up and then narrow up again and then open back up towards the top, so it's got that kind of serpentine look both this way and this way. I think I about got this piece where I want it. Just doing a little more trimming here. Now the next step to finishing this section is to just fill in the gaps between the layers with some vinyl spackling compound. That's what I'm doing here, just using a soft brush to kind of push it back in there. And you can dip the brush in some water to clean it up if you get too much on there. And this is just so it disguises the layers of foam. Then I just go back with a wet paper towel, get off most of the excess, and make sure it's just pushed back into those cracks where I want it and not obscuring the detail. Before I do any more carving on this next piece, once again I want to trace the shape so we'll know where to cut with the hot wire on the next hunk of foam. What I want to do is I want the canyon to start to get narrower towards the top. So I'm going to cut way inside this line. Puzzle piece out of there. And now I can come back to this line at an angle and make this so it kind of widens and angles out towards the top. And that fits together just like that. Well, now I'm ready to do a little bit of rock carving with my Dremel. And this is my favorite bit for doing that. This is a grinding stone bit I've got in here. I just want to go around, and first of all I'm going to add a little shelf down here at the bottom. Now put another line a little bit further up. Now I'm just going to keep adding horizontal erosion lines till I like the way it looks. Let that cool down for a minute. When it starts to get hot, it just wants to dig in and melt the foam. Now I add a few vertical drainage lines where water might run down the rock. Pieces that are broken away. And another thing I like to do before I'll call this carving finished is take some, this is some 400 grit sandpaper, so very fine sandpaper, and just kind of go over and knock the edges back just a little bit, give it a little bit more of an eroded surface. You want to use a really fine sandpaper for this, because if you use anything with a bigger grit on it, it's going to tear and rip the foam, and you're going to get, you know, some pilling and boogers on there, which you don't really want. So just going to take it. Now I've decided I'm going to go ahead and attach this piece to this earlier piece before I finish the painting on this, and then I'll have a big chunk that I can go ahead and install over in the scene. My favorite adhesive for gluing the sheet foam together is this Loctite Power Grab all-purpose adhesive. It comes out white. It also dries white. You use it in just like caulk, like this. You just need to put a bead around there. Don't need to spread it out too much. And the thing I like about this stuff is that it grabs right away, just like advertised. Put it on there and it just grabs that. Make sure it's straight. You got a little bit of working time. Press down real hard. I'll get some spackle back up in here also, and then I can paint and finish this section of scenery, and we can go and install it. Now I can go ahead and put these top two pieces together, so that'll be another scenery unit. Trying to get it so there's as few seams as possible. So it all looks like it's one thing, one piece. Now sometimes in order to hold these pieces together while they're drying, you need some sort of mechanical connection, and I like to use these bamboo skewers. Just push them straight through. Don't need a lot, just enough to keep it properly positioned while that power grab sets up. Just take some flush cutting pliers and you can just snip those off, and those will just stay in there. Makes for a stronger little assembly. Well, I think I've waited long enough for this spackle to dry, as long as I want to wait anyway. And now I'm going to get a coat of paint on here, start bringing this all together. I want to bring these separate scenic sections up to a high level of finish before they're installed, because as I mentioned earlier, I won't be able to reach back in here very well once they're over there in the scene. So especially back in the back end of the canyon, I want to get that in a high level of finish. And then once I get that, I'll come back and blend everything together once it's on the layout. But right now, I just want to get some color on this, and I'm starting with my dark scenic base coat. This is the darkest color that I use on the scenery. Just going to get an even coat and try to get into all of the nooks and crannies and everything, so everything's got a nice coverage on it. This color, basically, if you're looking for a name, is basically raw sienna. To have these colors made, what I do is I just get some acrylic paint, some artist's acrylic usually, and I'll paint it on a white square cardboard or illustration board. Then I'll take it down to my my hardware store and have them match the color and mix me up a gallon of it in just some flat interior latex, which is what this is. And that way I have a consistent color scheme throughout the entire layout. All of the scenery relates to each other because it all shares the same color palette. There's lighter and darker shades, but basically all starts the same. And we'll get some paint on this one too. Finish them both at the same time, and then I can install them together. The brush I'm using here, this is a 1-inch filbert brush. It's a artist brush, and it's one of my favorites for painting scenery with, because the shape is good for getting into tight places and nooks and crannies. But any kind of 1-inch brush will do for this. Soft is better because you need to be able to get back, have it form to the shape and get back in there. And put the two sections together and start to get an idea of how this is going to look when all is said and done. Now with that base coat dry, the next step in my process is to go back and spray on a dark wash. And this isn't just black. This is I use black acrylic mixed with some burnt umber, because you don't want a pure black on there, because that's not something you see very often in nature. But you want something dark that's going to get back in there and soak into the cracks and crevices and darken those up. Now, I don't care if this runs down, because that actually adds a little bit of realism. That's going to look like desert varnish or water streaks coming down the sides of the rock. Now, I've told you about the dark base color, but I also have a lighter base color that I have mixed up. And then what I do is I mix the two of those together 50-50, and I get a medium shade, which is what I'm going to turn to next. And using the same brush, just going to go in and start to add some more color and definition to these rocks here. And the idea is to just hit the tops of the surfaces so those darker shades show through from underneath. So we're working our way from the darkest shades to the lightest shades, to the highlights. And this is what really gives it that sandstone look. You see, for the most part, I'm going in the opposite direction of the strata that I carved. See, if this is horizontal, I'm going vertical with the brush just to bring out those top surfaces. Now I'm going to use my lighter scenery base. And what I want is I want it to kind of fade from a lighter shade to a darker shade all the way towards the bottom. So I'm going to just do that by controlling the amount of paint I put on, more at the top, less down towards the bottom. So I've got to kind of put it together like this so I can visually see. So I can see what I'm doing. Out here in this part of the Southwest, this shade of sandstone that I'm painting right now is known as coconino. So the coconino sandstone. And if you were to go up to the Grand Canyon, this is the layer you'd find up near the very top. A lot of times there'll be a lighter band down here. I've kind of carved this layer to look a little bit more like limestone, more blocky. Make sure you carry that over to the other side. These layers go all the way through. I'm going back to this limestone layer here. I want to lighten that up a little more, so I'm going to mix in some unbleached titanium right out of the tube. Just kind of dry brush that on there. Now I've got some red oxide, some burnt sienna, and some yellow ochre, and these are strong colors, so you want to use them sparingly. In fact, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. I just want to come along this top edge. Now I'm just adding some more colorful stripes here and there where I think it's warranted. And if it gets too much, I can always go back and dry brush over it again with the base color, tone it all down. Now I just want to take some of this burnt umber right out of the tube and do some streaks down the side. Let's try some of this yellow ochre and see what happens. Layer of uranium in there. Quite a bit of uranium mining here in the Southwest. Well, I think I'm ready to add this piece of scenery to the scene. And since I used all of the same colors and techniques that I did on the earlier part of the canyon that I built, it should blend in pretty well. Now, before I put this new section of scenery in the canyon here, I wanted to show you way back in here, there's a 5mm blue LED. And that is just to give a little atmospheric lighting coming from around the bend in the canyon. And it's on the same 9-volt circuit as the rest of the lights in Hanging Rock, which is right next door here. I just flip a switch and that comes on. But that'll be completely hidden now when I get this next piece of scenery on. Alright. That is starting to come together. It goes right up under this scenery that's already here. Alright, now I just need to fill in this area up here and this here and blend it into the side canyons. So, start cutting some more foam. On this rear bridge back here, I decided to change it up. It was originally, I kind of had a plate girder bridge planned for back there, but, you know, I was thinking that a natural bridge spanning this little canyon would look pretty cool. So, carve one out of some foam and see if I can get it in here. And I'll blend all that in with some Sculptamold. That'll be pretty cool. Well, I went ahead and did all of the blending with Sculptamold, and I'm sorry I didn't catch that on camera, but truth is my camera battery died and I needed to get it done so it would dry overnight. So I went ahead and did that. Basically, it was just taking the Sculptamold and pushing it into any openings and cracks and crevices and just smoothing and blending it all together. So now I can go in and using the same painting techniques I did back here in the canyon, the same colors, in the same order, and the same techniques, I can finish all of this up so it all looks like one piece. Down here in the bottom of the canyon, I've added some petroglyphs, some Native American rock art. They like to carve away this darker desert varnish and reveal the sandstone underneath. I've just got some horses and some hunters with bows and arrows, some clan symbols, spirals, thunderbird, things like that. And I get all these out of a book I have on Native American rock art. And of course, you know, if you hike out in the canyons here for any period of time, you'll see a lot of this stuff. And now I'm just going to put a little powdered chalk over the top of it to dull it back and make it look a little bit more ancient. And now, at long last, I can ballast this section of track back here between Tunnel 2 and Tunnel 3 along the back stretch here in Horse Thief Canyon. Just move these tunnel portals out of the way. And as usual, I'm just going to use this good old chick grit. This is some crushed pink granite chick grit that I use as ballast on the main line all over the layout. This track back here has already been painted. Did that a while ago, so that's ready to go. Now go back and groom all this with a couple of big soft brushes just to make sure there's no ballast up in the webbing of the rail. It's all down below the flanges of the wheels, so we don't have problems later on. That's probably about as good as I can get it. Now I'm going to take some white glue that's been diluted at 3:1 with water in a spray bottle and just soak it very carefully. While I've got the glue out, I also want to add a little real dirt ground cover here and there where it would erode down and sit on top of these rocks, using a couple of different colors to represent the lighter and darker sandstone. I particularly want to get some here on this on the Outlaw Trail, this path that snakes down into the canyon. I'm just sprinkling more of this sand on to soak up the excess glue. Now I'm just sprinkling on some real rocks and talus here and there, and gluing some bigger ones on. Give it a more realistic look. Now to span the frontmost track on Horse Thief Canyon, I created this deck truss bridge, and I put this together at about the same time I finished Geyser Gulch. So it was built at the same time I was doing that trestle there. And now I'm just figuring out how to make some bridge abutments for it, work it into the scene properly, and I'm going to carve some, I think, out of this this gold polyurethane foam. This is a carving foam that you can get from craft stores, and you can find it on Amazon and stuff like that. I did a whole video on gold foam. And I'm going to carve a random stone bridge abutment, one for each side. This is the larger one that goes on the right-hand side of the scene, so I'm going to start with that one. And then we can see about getting this bridge installed. Got this carved, got some primer on here. The next step is to add some spackle. Push it back into the cracks and crevices to simulate mortar. Now, just take a wet paper towel and go over the whole thing, remove most of the excess spackle. Now with the spackle dry, I can go back and use a small brush and the same earth tone colors I used on the canyon itself, on the rockwork, and pick out individual stones. Now I can just do a dark wash over the whole thing, and it'll tone that mortar down and tie everything together. To install my bridge, I'm going to try something a little tricky. Rather than spike the rails to the bridge and then install the whole thing, once again, I'm doing it the lazy way, and I've removed the plastic ties from the Pico Flex Track, and I'm going to install the bridge underneath the rail. And in order to hold it in place until I can spike the rail, I'm going to apply some thick cyanoacrylate to the bottom of these rails. I'm only doing it on each end, and I've marked center lines for the rails on top of the bridge so I can line this up properly. Hit it with accelerant. This abutment is shaped in such a way that it's going to lock this into place once it's glued in, or kind of wedge it. Now I've made up a small batch of some thick Sculptamold. I'll just use a little bit of that to blend this abutment in. And then it was time to spike the rails to the bridge ties using some micro-engineering small rail spikes. All right, with the last spike in, now I'll go back with some dark brown paint and touch up the rails, and then it's just some more bushes and weeds and cacti and things, and a few final details, and I think the scene is done. What we've got to have is some cactus. And these are some prickly pear cactus from Pegasus Models. Just poking little holes in the foam here with a bamboo skewer. And I can plant these cactus with little dabs of Eileen's tacky glue. This is a product from Scenic Express called buffalo grass, which I find looks really good in clumps. Desert scenes like this, going along the right-of-way. And since it's always spring in Thunder Mesa, gotta have some wildflowers here and there too. I like to grow along the right-of-way. Don't want to get too far over to the left here, because then I'm into the Devil's Garden, and that's going to be a whole nother project for another day. Now these blue-green clumps are also from Scenic Express, and I like them because they're a nice match for the bushes I painted on the backdrop off in the distance there. Kind of leads your eye right back into the scene. I don't want to add too much plant life down here in the bottom of the canyon, because places like this are constantly ravaged by flash floods, so not much grows down there. But one thing I always see is lots of debris, usually logs and things washed down from the high country, so I can add some of those. These are just some pine sticks that I gathered out in the yard. Yeah, that's good. There should also be some big boulders down here in the bottom of the canyon, washed from upstream. These are real rocks I collected on my travels. Yeah, I think I should leave it alone for now. Well, I think that's going to do it for Horse Thief Canyon. Of course, there's more to do in this section over here. Over here, we've got some Indian ruins that are coming. This whole area around Devil's Garden with the balancing rocks needs to be finished and animated. And this little panel right back here needs to be finished below Hanging Rock, but pretty happy with the way the canyon turned out. There's still work to do back here on the Horse Thief ore bin. This is just a mock-up sitting there, so still lots of projects to keep me busy, but very happy to get this canyon done. And I want to thank you all for tuning in and watching that entire video. I hope you got something good out of it. Until next time, keep moving forward, everybody, and adios for now.